So all my thoughts about the future that make me anxious and afraid and angry are false. That eliminates a lot of suffering right there.
Today's guest is someone whose life journey is nothing short of remarkable, deep transformation. Jonathan Labman, or John, as I love to call him from now on, is a spiritual awakening professional with over 24 years of experience guiding thousands out of the shackles of abuse, anxiety, and exhaustion into lives of peace, clarity, and liberation. A survivor of childhood abuse and religious cults, John's story is not just one of survival, but of profound awakening and purpose. He shares his insights through his compelling column, Simply Awake, and his powerful book, Being Human and Waking Up. With a rich background in psychology, energy healing, and yoga, John is here to help us reconnect with our truth, master the basics of being human, and discover what it really means to wake up. Welcome to the show, John. How are you doing?
Toby, I'm doing great, and I want to put a plug into all your listeners to give you lots of 5-star reviews and to subscribe and like because you're doing this from the love of your heart and for the betterment of spiritual life in all human beings. And I vibe with that. So I want your listeners to give you some good love back as well. And
Thank you so much.
I'm enjoying talking to you, and I'm doing well. Going through another spiritual transition that I just explained to you is the loss of all ambition. Some people tell me or say that this is a kind of ego death, although I don't really understand what that means anymore. The ego still has to go on as an interface with the world, unless you're sitting in a cave somewhere. But that's how I am, and right now I'm still in private practice as a therapist and an awakening guide.
When you mentioned that earlier before we started recording, I was just thinking about a phoenix, for example. Sometimes you want us to die spiritually to be reawakened, to reborn, basically. I
Right.
don't know. I don't know if that's the phase you're going through right now. That you have to die to
Yeah.
be given birth to again, or something like that, in a different form, in a fresher way, in a bigger way, maybe.
So if you're asking how I see spiritual awakening, it is for me. Um, I've seen it through brain science recently in the way of moving from the left brain and its dominance to the right brain, but also you could say moving from identifying with that chattering voice in your head that calls itself I or me to identifying with God itself. And God itself means a sense of no space boundaries, spatial boundaries, no time boundaries, just present moment, eternal awareness. And then there are certain aspects when you're identifying with the God part of you, which are love, contentment, freedom, peace, and truthfulness. All of which, I say, if you remember nothing else, remember that love and truth always have to go together. And as we move from the fear-based and pain-based ego to the spirit, to the divine, or whatever you want to call it in the yoga tradition, Brahman, then we're moving from really a mind-bound, thought-bound life to a life that has a very different ground. You might say the ground of being or the ground of eternity. And so to me, in Christianity, you talk about salvation and sanctification. And almost all spiritual traditions talk about some sort of initial awakening experience where you begin to understand that there is a God and that God is part of you and you are part of God. And then there's a transformative journey where you keep learning, first of all, how to be a human being, because nobody teaches us how to deal with the fact that 90 to 95% of our thoughts are false. Nobody teaches us how to name and feel our emotions. I mean, at least in the Western culture that I grew up in, nobody was interested in emotions. They either wanted you to be happy, or if you're a man, you could be angry, but now you can be angry only in a certain way, right? The idea that there was anxiety or fear, there was melancholy or grief or sadness or, extreme grief. All of those things are not even really talked about or taught in school at all. And so when people come to me and they're suffering, I first try to teach them, okay, start to notice that your thoughts are not you. That's the first step, really, is you separate yourself from your thoughts. You realize there's another part of you that's not just thinking, thinking, thinking all the time. And that life is not about thinking. Life is about the contact with the senses. And we're in contact with the reality through our senses. And if we want even sort of physical and emotional stability, we need to spend less time in our thoughts and more time in nature and in contact with three-dimensional world. That there's a gradual transformation. All the patterns that you learned growing up, maybe that you brought into this life from other lives, if you believe in past lives, which I do because of personal experience, all of that has to be refined and transformed. And usually the refining is difficult. They don't call it purification for nothing. But it's like, the divine is burning the dross or the lead out of your gold so that you eventually become transparent and hopefully shine with the attributes that we all agree are divine attributes like love and truth.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so profound. If I could take you back a little bit, earlier you talked about, living that pain-based life, basically, like leaving that behind you, like, overcoming that. I mean, I find that very intriguing, and I would like us to revisit your past a little bit, if that's okay with you,
Oh, it's
because
fine. Yeah.
you've experienced both, deep trauma and deep transformation. You are in the cult. You had experiences with the cult in the past, been abused also in the past. So can you take us back to that moment in your life, and also to the moment when you realized that you are no longer a victim or to all of this anymore? Can you
Right.
walk us through that?
So, very briefly, because I'm 70 years old last month,
Oh, congratulations. Happy
thank you.
birthday.
I grew up in a normal middle class home in the United States, right outside of Trenton, New Jersey. But I was subject to sexual abuse in my home as a child by one of my parents. And because of abuse, and now I've studied a lot about it now because of my own history and interest in helping others. The brain gets changed and coordination can be difficult. So when I went to school, and also you don't trust people, or you don't know who to trust really when you're being abused by a parent. And so I went to school and I was very awkward and uncoordinated. And so I was really bad at sport, all kinds of sports. And so I was the last picked for teams and I was bullied and picked on and sort of tormented in school. And the only way that I survived that was that I was actually a good academic. So, and I became the teacher's pet, which of course made me more the target of abuse, but I didn't know that. I was trying to find some way to attach to an adult in a way that was safe. And so go on to about age 15, and I'm really by then pretty tormented. And I started going to a psychologist because I was so messed up inside and so confused and so anxious. I would come home every day with terrible headaches. I was just petrified of being in school. So lived a life of fear. And then one day we're sitting in a 10th grade assembly, like a big assembly for the whole 10th grade. There were 750 students. And somebody comes and they show us a film about an international school on the south coast of Wales. Still there. It's called the United World College of the Atlantic. It's the first of maybe 20 schools around the world that are bringing students together from many countries to learn to take the International Baccalaureate curriculum. We were the first class at United World College to do that. And they show this film, and the school is in a castle on the Welsh seacoast. I'm like, huh, okay, wait, I've been reading about castles all my life. I might go to school in one. And so I went right down to the front of the auditorium and signed up and applied to go to school, clear out of the blue. I don't know why I did it. I was like, oh, great, get me out of here. Get me to someplace beautiful like this. My life will change, right? So at the same time, I was starting to study the New Testament. I was raised in a Jewish household, right? Although they weren't really very religious, obviously. And so I started praying. I was saying, okay, I don't really know if you exist, God, but if you exist, they tell me that it's impossible for us to get a scholarship for this school because we're too middle class. So if you exist, I was so arrogant. if you exist, please give me this scholarship. Then I'll believe in you and I'll change my life and start a religious or spiritual path. And there was a postal strike that year in the United Kingdom, and I waited a whole month for a letter to come. I got accepted April 1st. No news about finance until May 1st. All that month I was on my knees praying, or however I was praying in those days. And I got the financial aid and the scholarship that I needed. And then I was ecstatic for a while. But of course, you take your problems with you wherever you go. So I went to school, had a wonderful 2-year experience there, but I had depression, I had anxiety, I had what we call dissociation, where you kind of check out of your body, you go into a freeze response, and really had a hard time getting through school, although I did. I came back to this country. I went to one college. I had a nervous breakdown. I got better for a little while. I went to a different school. I went to a Christian college in Georgia, where I became a pre-seminary student. I was going to go to seminary. But in the meantime, I went and joined a commune in California for a few months. Left school, right? So I was just all over the place looking for some sense of security and peace and some connection with God that I could feel. I go to this commune in California, and after 3 months, I'm depressed again. They put me on a 1-month water-only fast. I went from 140 pounds, now I'm about 210 pounds now. So I went from 140 pounds to 115 pounds in that month. And I just got much worse in terms of psychological and mental health. And by the end of that time, I finally decided to go home. And within 10 days, I was in a mental hospital. And I was getting electroconvulsive therapy or shock treatments in those days, where they use electrical voltage to scramble your short-term memory because they think that's where the seat of your emotional problems are. In those days, anyway, they thought that. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is not exactly schizophrenia, but it's sort of an environmentally caused break with reality, and with severe depression. And after 2 months, I was pulled out of the program by my stepfather and mother, and I started trying to recover. I went back to college eventually. And when I was at college, my mother was going to divorce my stepfather, so I had no home to come to. I stayed at college one summer, and then the next year, I met some people from a church that was part of the denomination that sponsored the college. It was the Reformed Presbyterian Church Evangelical Synod in those days, now part of the Presbyterian Church in America. And this church invited me to come for the summer and stay with one of the elders, get a job, and participate in the church and see if I could become one with God again. And like the commune, it didn't really work very well. And when I went back to school after the summer, the elder that I was living with and his whole family were excommunicated from the church. And there was a big split in the church, and the church started devolving into a brainwashing cult. And when I finished college, I came back because I had taken lifetime vows to be there and serve God there and become more holy there. We kept the Sabbath, we were celibates, we were strict celibates, and we gave a tithe of our pre-tax income, 1/10, to the church. And we had to really hear everything they said and repeat it the way they wanted us to repeat it. And we had to feel what they wanted us to feel. And we eventually got cut off from our families, and we weren't allowed to mix with our colleagues at work, although we all had jobs. And after about 6 years of that, someone tried to burn the church down. And then the woman who really was running the church behind her husband and son, who were the two elders, decided that all the church members must be in sin, otherwise God would never have allowed that to happen to the church. So we were all put on suspension from communion. We were all going to be excommunicated if we didn't cough up some sort of secret sin. Well, I coughed up what I thought was a secret sin, but since I had never actually acted on my sexual orientation at that time, I decided, they said, oh, that's not your secret sin, and you still have to tell us what that is, or you can't come back into the church. You're going to be excommunicated. And for 6 months, I paced the floors at night until 3 a.m. usually. and then went to work the next day, trying to figure out what to do. And finally, we were carrying pews back into the church, having refinished them, And I thought, well, I still haven't come up with anything else that I can think of that's this terrible secret sin. And they said to me, well, if you are gay and you leave the church, you're going to get AIDS and die and go to hell. But if you come into our church and you haven't coughed up your secret sin, you're doubly damned to hell as a hypocrite. So I was given what was really not any kind of a choice. It was what we call in psychology a double bind. You're damned if you do this, you're damned if you do that. There's no choice that you make that'll be good for you. And at that point, it was October of 1984. One Saturday morning, I packed up my things, put them in storage, and fled. And the next day, I was in therapy with a psychotherapist in Princeton, New Jersey. It's a long way away because I was living in King of Prussia. So it's about an hour and a half. But somebody found me this therapist, and that woman that was the first time I felt like I had any hope to have a life of my own, and that I had anything in me that was valuable to give anybody else. It was the first time I felt like I might be able to live and be myself. And that, I was already 29 years old. That started my transformation into being a conscious human being. And that continued into many different other places over many years, including training as a method actor, coming out as a gay man during AIDS epidemic in New York City, meeting people, deciding I hated acting. I had a Broadway voice, and my two vocal coaches had Broadway stars singing with them, and they told me I could sing on Broadway, but I would have to go to school. Well, I didn't like it at all. I thought the whole business was pretty sleazy, and there was a lot of competition, and a lot of people that were more talented and more handsome, and I thought, I'm not going to do this. So, but it really taught me a lot about emotion, that even your imagination can bring up a lot of emotion in your body. And that really has helped in a long time way, in a big way, for me to say, wait, if false thoughts can make up emotion, how much emotion are we suffering as a result of thinking badly, thinking falsely? And eventually I found my way into Eastern mystical teachings, the teachings of Hinduism, of yoga, of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and started studying sort of the spirituality of being present in the moment and of how to actually become one with the divine. Because in the East, they really perfected those teachings. In the West, we're really perfecting knowledge as a way to God, but I don't think it works very well. And an experiential sense works much better. So I worked with these people, and they did a combination of breath work and massage therapy and counseling and meditation and mindfulness. And that was in the late 1980s, and that became a pattern. The first thing that I did was to study massage therapy and learn how to deal with the body, because I had all kinds of aches and pains in my body because of trauma. And, there's a lot of tension in the body when there's been a lot of trauma. We're always defending ourselves against the next thing that's going to happen to us. And my back would go out frequently. I'd be in a lot of pain. So chiropractic and massage therapy helped me. And I knew I didn't want to go to chiropractic school. So I went to massage therapy training for a whole year, and then became a licensed massage therapist, even worked for an insurance company in New York City. And I worked with a lot of people then. And then I studied energy healing, psychic and energetic healing, learning to work with the auras and the chakras, based in the yoga system, but sort of modernized. A woman named Barbara Brennan was not my teacher, but taught my teachers. They taught me. And during that time, I was understanding that if I could actually feel somebody's chakras across the room, which we were trained to do, there must be something connecting us. Like we were all in water, but we just didn't know it. And the water was flowing through me and flowing through Toby and flowing through everybody. That was important when I began to study yoga. But after getting the training in healing, I went right to graduate school and got the training in psychology, because I saw that most of the healing that we were doing in energy work was really based on psychological and emotional and mental problems. So I was like, okay. I was already 43 then. I thought, all right, well, it's pretty late in life, but I'm going to graduate school. So I got a master's degree in counseling. And then I took a yoga teacher training the very next year. And then I began to teach meditation. And at that time, I had what I would consider the first initial spiritual awakening, what they call Kensho in the Buddhist tradition, where I really understood that the awareness that was in me was the same as the Holy Spirit, or God is in me, right? And Jesus taught that too. I don't think people recognize that he did. But, he said to the Pharisees, the Father and I are one essence. They pick up stones to stone him. And he says, to paraphrase, you guys are idiots. Because the scripture says all of you are sons of God. What do you think that means? It means you're one with God. And so even though that's more of a Gnostic view of the New Testament, I mean, I had studied the New Testament in total detail, right? I started reading it a little differently after that. And I thought, oh, okay. So this is what Jesus was saying. He's saying, the Father and I are one essence, and you are also one essence with the Father. In my spiritual awakening, I became aware that awareness or spirit was my essential nature and started to learn to live from that ground of being, from that center of gravity, rather than from my mind as the center of gravity. And that's the long journey. I hope that I'm not boring your listeners. It's been a long story, I know, but
I'm totally immersed into your story right now, like just deep into it. Having pictures and videos playing through my mind right now as you was narrating that. Like I'm watching a movie. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, that's like wow, you've experienced a lot. If I could summarize that in a sentence, that's a lot I've experienced. And from all of that, would you say, I mean, looking back and reflecting and looking at your life right now, would you say you've been able to totally heal from the abuse, from the trauma of the past? Or it's still an ongoing thing?
I would say that for most trauma survivors, there is a good deal of healing possible, but there is nervous system, there's changes to the brain and the nervous system that happen. I just discovered through another podcast, actually, I discovered a treatment for the nervous system that's a medical treatment that's now being used for trauma survivors. It's called dual sympathetic reset stellate ganglion block. And they inject, there's some nerves in your neck that are producing extra adrenaline when you've had a lot of trauma. So there's your normal adrenal glands, but apparently there's adrenaline also able to be produced here. This is my understanding. I'm a layperson, so it may not be totally correct. But if they inject these nerves with an anesthetic, and that's what they do, they can interrupt the constant sort of high voltage of your amygdala. And your amygdala is the smoke detector of your brain. It's sort of like the danger detector. And in trauma survivors, it's kind of on high alert all the time, and it's never rested after the trauma happened. And, because I was in a cult, there was a lot of fear and terror and trauma there too. And so my nervous system was just on high alert all the time. So I didn't think that I was going to be able to get rid of that. But in December, I had the treatment and calmed way down.
Wow.
Even the startle response to loud noises calmed way down. So, but I still think there are brain changes that we don't know how to heal them all. So I would say, no, I'm not totally healed from trauma, but I would say about 95%.
5% is a very good score.
It's a good score. And
Yeah.
the other thing is it's not just about an injection, but you also have to change the way you think about everything, because when you've endured trauma, you think that your parents are really representations of the divine. So you think the whole universe is going to be catastrophically difficult all the time. And so the way, even after the initial spiritual awakening, I started working with how many of my thoughts were false and how many of those false thoughts produced lots of anxiety and lots of sadness and sometimes a lot of anger. I didn't tend to be angry, but could be. And that really informed my work as a therapist, because I started practicing as a therapist in 2000. And eventually I decided to get a license, which is different from getting your degree. So I went back to work for organizations, and I worked for a drug and alcohol rehab facility. And I was seeing that a lot of the people that were using drugs and alcohol had histories of trauma. And I had a boss who was great. She sent me to meet a world famous trauma treatment specialist named Bessel van der Kolk, he's written a New York Times bestseller called The Body Keeps the Score, which I highly recommend to your listeners. It's an amazing book. So when I came back from meeting him at a yoga retreat center called Kripalu, my boss and my supervisor at the time said, as soon as you get your license, I want you to head a trauma treatment project for our agency, and I want you to help get a grant, and I want you to get our people educated with Bessel van der Kolk and his team. And that was before we had FM and Skype and Zoom, and they had all this elaborate camera equipment. This was in 2011, I think, and we had 30 weeks of training with Dr. van der Kolk and all of his PhD staff and his MD staff in trauma. And we also had 10 people from other agencies come in and join us. So we began to educate people in therapeutic roles. And I got deeply involved in trauma because around 2007, I started remembering what had happened to me as a kid. And I was 52 years old. I didn't remember what had happened until then. And it was only because it was happening to somebody in the next generation in the family that I even remembered. And so that got me very interested because suddenly my world was upside down, and here was all this trauma I didn't know anything about. And I'd had a sort of, I don't know if you know the word saccharin, right? Artificial sweetener. I had a sort of saccharine view of my previous life, totally shattered. And then I began to understand what people would go through if they were being treated for trauma successfully. And I really wanted to do that because I knew how hard it was being for me to feel better. It's kind of like life just went upside down. I couldn't sleep at night, and I was 52 and I was already a therapist and I was already spiritually awake, but this stuff comes up and then you're totally overwhelmed. Yeah.
I mean, I've been getting this recommendation often. The book, The Body Keeps It Counts. I think I should pick it up very soon to read also. Yeah, but I mean, I think I've been reading like a bit of excerpts from them, like a bit of extractions from the book. And there's one part, maybe not from the book directly, but I've heard also in the past, correct me if I'm wrong, that sometimes the brain blocks out some memories from our childhood days just to protect us, basically. Some
That's
bad things that we might
exactly
have
right.
experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The brain, that's called dissociation. It's also called a freeze response. When you go into freeze response, it's because your nervous system is so far up the ladder of heightened anxiety that it can no longer cope. So you go into freeze. In freeze, there's no verbal ability. The verbal centers in the brain go dark. There's nothing, no energy there at all. All the energy is in fight or flight, and you're not able to speak. And then it's hard to remember. Your right brain can remember, but I think the left brain, the verbal, goes offline altogether. So, and then, yes, much later, if you're safe enough, the memories can begin to come up. But of course, when they do, then you're sort of re-traumatized unless you're getting treatment. Another good book to recommend to you and to your listeners is Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey wrote a book called, now can I remember it? What Happened to You is the
Oh,
name of the book.
yeah.
Have you seen that one?
I listened to the interviews about them, like Oprah Winfrey
Okay.
interviewing the doctor. I was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I had studied with Bessel van der Kolk first with that program that I mentioned earlier, the 30-week program. But then I was also invited to study with Dr. Bruce Perry, who wrote What Happened to You. And that was a year-long program with about 20 of us from various agencies. And he was also really good and really clear in the book that he wrote with Oprah is very simple in terms of there's not a lot of technical psychological language or neuroscience language. It's very well presented. Your readers, anybody with a history of trauma, will really benefit from that. And of course, you plugged my own book, so I'll mention it again. Being Human and Waking Up is about how to cope with your own humanity. And what happens to us as a result of trauma is that we just get all tied up in knots and anxiety. And the thoughts are all tied up in anxiety and knots. So we have to unravel all that. And it takes work. It's absolutely worth it because instead of living like a ball of stress, you live like a human being. You live like a spiritual being. You live like a child of God, a part of God itself. And that's been an ongoing trend even since 52. I mean, I keep learning about trauma. I've got a course on my open tabs here, on my browser window. That's Bessel van der Kolk and other people now updating us on what's new in trauma treatment. So it keeps going on.
Yeah, it's an ongoing journey. I mean, we keep on improving our lives and healing from our past wounds gradually, gradually. I don't think it's something that you can be 100% healed from. It's something that you have to continue working on, unfortunately.
But what I would say, Toby, is that it gets much easier because if you understand your human mechanism, you understand that your mind can create thoughts that have nothing to do with reality. Like all my thoughts about the future, you look at the headlines now, you think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to the world? Right. All my thoughts about the future really are false. They're lies. God doesn't give us a view of the future. We don't have a crystal ball. We're not mind readers. We're not future readers. It's all my thoughts about the future that make me anxious and afraid and angry are false. That eliminates a lot of suffering right there. And then whatever I think about what other people are saying, thinking, and doing about me or in general, they're false too, unless I ask the person. Like you're smiling at me this whole time, right? You could be you could be thinking, yeah, that Labman, he's a real idiot. And if I were still believing my thoughts, I might be afraid of that.
That's true. Yeah.
But when you look, you can't possibly know what anybody's thinking unless they tell you. And also then all the thoughts that we learn about ourselves as survivors of abuse, people that have insulted us, people that have called us names, people that have said this, that, and the other thing about us, the people that told me I would get AIDS and die and go to hell if I was actually gay. I understand that all of those thoughts about myself are also false. Trying to put the self in words is like trying to put the ocean in a glass. You
That's
can't do it.
impossible.
It's impossible.
Just allow your thoughts to flow and watch them, basically. Detach yourself from them, observe them.
Right,
Yeah.
observe them and realize that most of them are baloney, to use a polite word, otherwise known as BS to your English speaking listeners, right?
Yeah.
And so when you realize that those thoughts are also causing your body to generate a lot of contraction, a lot of anxiety and anger, a lot of adrenaline comes from those thoughts, you just can gradually over time, you can shut down all of that unnecessary emotional and physical suffering. Because when you're anxious, your body is kind of like this. You lose your neck if you're my age, shoulders are up to your ears, all kinds of things happen, right?
That's true.
So, your listeners, if they're struggling with trauma and they want a better life, it's there, it's available. The trauma treatment, I'm sure in Europe is quite good too. And here it's just gotten better and better. And then when you add meditation and mindfulness and a true sense of being part of the whole universe and the universe actually supporting you, which we would call a spiritual path, but I would just say, well, that's real life, right? Then the capacity for peace and for basic contentment actually comes online, maybe for the first time, especially for people with lots of trauma.
I mean, thank you so much for that. Apart from reading your book, a question that's coming up for me right now is apart from reading your book and getting other resources, to help on this journey of healing, what can we listeners right now have in our first aid kit in case, something comes up during our healing journey? We're on this healing journey, but sometimes life just happens and things get triggered, some wounds get ripped off again and it becomes fresh again. What can I do as a first aid kit to, cover it up and clean it up properly so it heals again?
Well, it's a really great question. So the simplest thing, if it's a thought-based catastrophe that's happening, if it's all internal, question whether the thought is true. But if something's happening on the outside and the inside and you're overwhelmed, what I say to people is you want to get present in your body. You want to look around the room literally like you're a dog or a cat, kind of
Mm,
moving from the waist
yeah.
right? And looking around the room and see if there's any danger actually present in this moment.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly, like that. Yeah. And then if you see that there's no danger, get your feet on the ground and
Mhm.
see if you can feel your feet on the ground. Can I feel my feet? Okay. Can I feel my hands on the arms of the chair if there are arms, or on the desk? I have a nice Turkish wood desk here, right? It's very smooth. Can I feel the sensations? And that begins to put me back in touch with reality as it currently is, not a memory that brings back a terrible set of emotions. What we call flashback is really emotions from the past that flood the present, make us feel unsafe. So looking around and getting present in the moment with what's actually here is a big reality check to your brain that says, okay, there's nobody here who's insulting me or trying to abuse me or is going to hit me or is chasing me with a weapon. Right? I'm safe right now. You might even say something like, repeat that, like, I'm safe right now, I'm safe right now, or whatever your listeners would say to themselves that would be similar to that. I'm like, I'm safe, or everything's okay right now. I used to use those mantras when my trauma first came up and I couldn't sleep at night and things were so difficult, about 18 years ago. And also, there's a breathing technique that people can use right away that doesn't take a lot of learning. It's very simple, and I'll show you and your listeners right now. So, you want to sit up straight when you're breathing like this because you don't want to contract your lungs or put pressure on your diaphragm. And so you want to take a very deep breath for about 2 seconds if you can, and then exhale as many seconds as you can, 4, 6, or 8 seconds slowly. And count while you're exhaling. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, however long you can do it. And then take another rapid deep inhale for 2 seconds and exhale slowly. And, might relax more with your eyes closed, but if you're not feeling safe, you might keep them open because you'll see statues of Buddha with the eyes two-thirds closed but slightly open. So if you're not feeling safe in your body, having your eyes open is another line of defense and another way to tell your brain it's okay to be calm right now. Everything's all right. So those are sort of some emergency measures that I teach a lot of people who have histories of trauma and that really helped me. But of course, also just going outside and feeling whatever the temperature is on your skin, looking at the sky, the clouds, listening to the birds, anything that locates you back in present moment reality is going to help calm the trauma response down and lower the adrenaline level. If you don't have any more memories coming up that trigger the adrenaline, your adrenaline level will go to about 50% in 20 minutes. So they say the half-life of adrenaline is 20 minutes. So you're going to calm down within about 20 minutes, and that's good to know because then you can reassure yourself, okay, this is bad right now, but it's going to get better as I do my breathing, as I contact present moment reality. It really is a very simple way to help. But the simplest ways, especially with trauma survivors, the simplest exercises are the best because you can remember them when you're in the middle of that panic. It's like, oh, breathe, feel the desk, listen to the sounds, whatever that is, right?
That brings you back into the present, It brings you back to the moment.
That's right. I mean, practices like yoga asana, the postures of yoga, not the philosophy, but the postures, the popular yoga, can I be in tree pose, can I be in dog pose, can I be in cow pose, right? That kind of movement meditation or tai chi or qigong or martial arts of various kinds, all of those keep us back in the present moment in our bodies. And so any of those things that your listeners want to do, as long as they feel safe doing them, will be very helpful to them. I took yoga classes for 7, 8 years, became a yoga teacher, herniated a disc in my back during that process. So I didn't do that kind of yoga much after that, but it's a very useful to feel like I'm in my body and I'm safe. Because when you've got a lot of trauma, you're dissociating out of your body. You don't want to feel what's going on. You want to take yourself as far away as you can. And so we're bringing ourselves back to safe contact with the body now. And the body is also the way in which we experience our spiritual connection to the divine.
We need our body to be aligned to our soul and to our spirit.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I've learned a lot from you, John. I mean, this is, has been so awesome. If there's someone out there right now listening that is feeling, broken, disconnected, or they feel like they will never feel whole again, they've just given up that hope because, maybe things keep on reoccurring. They've been on different healing journeys and, just seems to be working for them. What
Mhm.
would you say to them right now? What would you say to their soul in this very moment?
Remember that you are the divine in a body and that you've come here not just to suffer, but to become the divine in the body and to master your humanity and to get along with your humanity and to heal your humanity from all the difficulty that's come before. And it's possible to do it. I'm nobody special. If I can do it, you can do it. And it's really important to find, especially for a trauma survivor, a good trauma treatment psychotherapist, PhD or master's level person who is safe to be with and who looks at you through the lens of what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. Because it's all about what happened to you and how you respond. And you can undo how you responded to trauma. And then when you undo that, then you're free to respond to the present moment. And that is a process that does work and can happen. And I'm living proof of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we are all spiritual beings having physical expressions at the moment, and yeah,
That's right. That's right.
that's what came up to me when you said that right now. Like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a very
Wow.
good quote.
So for people out there who, for example, would love to pick up your book, also get to work with you, in your practice also, what's the best way to connect with you? What's the best way to work with you?
Well, because of your generosity and that of all the podcasters I've been, I'm going to give your listeners a free copy of my latest book in PDF form. And all they have to do is write to me on an email, and it's this support. It's what we all need. Support at simplyawake.com. And Simply Awake, SIMPLYAWAKE with no space.com. Support at simplyawake.com is the best way to connect. I will send them a free book. I will also offer them a free 15-minute consult. Even if they're in Europe, doesn't matter. We can work out the time difference. And that's how they can contact me. And my website is called simplyawake.com. So very easy to find that as well. There's more information there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. It has been so wonderful speaking with you. I'm so happy that you shared your story, took us on that journey, and through that story also learn how we could, I mean, not just learn, but you gave us that hope that even though you go through abuses and trauma in the past, you have the ability to heal from it and to get
That's right.
much more spiritual, awakened.
That's right. It's available. Don't suffer. Go find it.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure to meet you, Toby.
Thank you very much.